Okay, so it's about 12:15 and I don't want to keep people late. We've got a great number of people on the call, so I appreciate your coming. So I'm Emily Brackett and I am here with Maddie Purcell, and we'll do some full introductions in a minute. But I want to just remind you that this is part of a 3-part webinar series happening today and the next 2 Wednesdays. Called From Accidental Entrepreneur to Intentional Business Owner. So today we're going to talk about the big question: are you ready to start a business? Next week we're going to focus on what is your big idea, how to come up with an idea or refine an idea, and Maddie's going to take the lead on that one. And then the last part will be build a brand that the market wants. And since you're registered for this one, you have access to all 3 of them, and you will also get the recordings for all 3 of them automatically if you can't come live. So thanks again. And so I'll just introduce myself first, and then I'll give Maddie a chance to talk about her business as well. So I am a graphic designer. I graduated from design school and I thought I had a great career path in front of me. It seemed like a really stable yet creative and interesting job. And I got my first job at a big creative agency in Chicago. And I was there for about a year. We lost a big client and about a quarter of the staff was laid off. And I was really disappointed, and I remember several of us went out for drinks a couple days later, and one of the senior people who had not gotten laid off said, "Oh, well, this is just the way the industry is. Creative firms get a bunch of new work and they hire people and then they lose clients and they lay them off. And I've been laid off a bunch of times in my career." And I was really shocked because I'd never thought of this career choice as being that unstable. But I did end up finding another job quickly, and it wasn't really a problem. I worked at another firm for a number of years. It was great. And then I made the move to my 3rd job. And by this point, it was 2000 going into 2001. If you remember the time, the first internet bubble was popping, and it was clear we were in a recession. And I ended up getting laid off the summer in July of 2001. And again, so I felt like, gosh, 2 out of 3 jobs I got laid off from. And that summer it was clear I was not going to find another full-time job. No design firms were hiring. And I had always thought, well, someday I wanted to own my own design firm. It came a little sooner than I had expected, but I said, well, I took a lot of the summer to think about it. I really was fluctuating between yeah, I might as well do it, or thinking, hey, this career choice kind of sucks and maybe I should just do something completely else. I even thought about becoming a physical therapist and all sorts of other things. But I did decide, I took the summer to do a lot of stuff on my own that I had interest in. And I still remember, I actually was into triathlons, and I spent the summer training for a half Ironman. And I came across the finish line with that feeling of if I can do this, I can do anything. And the next day was Sunday. I went to a barbecue and I said, I am starting my business tomorrow. Monday, I am starting my own design firm. So that was Monday, September 10th, 2001. Obviously, the next day was 9/11. So I know a lot about this up and down of starting a business during really tough economic times. I have continued to have Visible Logic through the 2008-2009 recession. It's still going strong today. It's in better shape than it's been in a long time the past few years. But I did just want to introduce my second business because that came about in much different circumstances. Branding Compass is a piece of software, but I developed it because I could recognize that Visible Logic used to work with a lot of really small businesses on their logos and websites, etc. And we saw a lot of that work go to Squarespace and 99 Designs and all these low cost or automated services. And while we've been able to capture more work, higher up the food chain, I recognized these small business owners were lacking something. So I developed Branding Compass, which is a software to help these small business owners do all that work that's not covered by those services. And it helps you write a unique value proposition and discover the best words, fonts, colors, and visuals for your branding. So that's how I started into both of my businesses. And I'm going to turn it over to Maddie now to talk about her businesses.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everybody. So I had a little bit of a different starting journey. And it's been interesting to see the ways that Emily and I have had similar experiences despite different businesses, different journeys. Looking back, like in hindsight, I would say I was entrepreneurial growing up. I was always like, starting a neighborhood newspaper, or in high school, I launched a road race. But for some reason, the concept of starting things and starting a business, those were like totally foreign. I didn't understand entrepreneurship as a career path for me. And I got really stuck through school and college, and then after like young adulthood, thinking about what I should be doing, and trying to figure out, like, based on what other people wanted, where I should be. And spoiler alert, it's not a great way to like find what makes you happy and what you're actually good at and things like that. So I was stuck in just a job. Like, there was nowhere for me to go in it. There was nothing really to learn, and but I didn't know where I wanted to go, and so I was pretty stuck. But eventually I sort of stumbled across a process for creativity, and I'm going to talk a lot about that next week, and the steps and mindset shifts and things like that that got me from being really stuck to knowing where I wanted to go, at least in the short term. So eventually I started Fyood Kitchen in 2016. And Fyood is a cooking competition company. So we bring people together for creative cooking competitions. We do team building and birthdays and bachelorettes, all kinds of group events. Obviously, things are a little bit different at this exact moment in our COVID time. But Fyood was my learning how to start a business on the fly experience. And certainly didn't feel ready when I was starting it, but also I got excited, and I hadn't been excited in a long, long time. And so that excitement ended up being enough for me to very imperfectly start a business and figure out where I was going as I was doing it. So spent the first 2 years of Fyood in pilot mode before really figuring out, like, okay, here's how to make this a replicable business and how to scale it and bring the value of what we had to the market. And then in 2019, last fall, I had the opportunity to start Portland Rising, which is a professional women's ultimate team. It's actually the first pro women's sports team in the history of the state of Maine. And with Maine's bicentennial this year turning 200, it's been like about time, but also a cool story to get to be a part of. And this time, based on my experience with Fyood, I knew how to start a business right. And so I didn't waste a lot of time at the beginning with missteps and not trusting myself. And we had an extremely successful launch in the fall and early winter. It was breakneck speed, going from we got the team in mid-November to we were going to have our first game on April 16th. The season has been suspended, and we're figuring out what 2020 looks like. But Portland Rising as an organization, institution, even though we started it right now, we still have this opportunity to be pivoting and applying a lot of the lessons that we're going to go over in these webinars to our new COVID situation, just like people who might be starting out from scratch. So that's where I've been, and excited to share some of the things that have been really helpful along the way.
Thanks, Maddie. So we're going to go through today 3 sections: mindset, money, and market. I did want to bring your attention to, in the GoToMeeting sort of control panel, there's a section for questions. Go ahead, if you're having questions along the way, to type them in. I may hold off to the end to answer them, just depending on the flow, but go ahead so they're queued up so we can get to them all at the end. And we did want to keep these. We understand, I feel like everybody's very stressed for time these days. So we do want to keep this definitely under an hour here. We've got about 30 minutes of content, and then we will have plenty of time for questions at the end. And I do have someone, if anybody's having any sort of technical issues as well, just put it in either the chat or the questions, and we'll try to fix whatever's, help you with whatever's going on. So great. The first thing is mindset. This situation to me right now does feel a lot like the time of 9/11. People are very emotional. People are really, this is you're questioning things. It's going beyond potentially just losing a job. It's really, people are doing deep questioning of like, it's not just this job, it's this career I'm in is not what I expected, and do I want to keep doing it? Or they thought they had a career path laid out for themselves based on a different type of situation that we're in right now. Or it may be less about work. It may be just about, is this where I want to live? Like, am I living in a location that I like, close or far enough from my family in a way that I like? It's just a time where a lot of people are questioning things. And it can also be the time where this is like the kick in the butt you might need to make a different choice about your life. So I do want us all to recognize this is like not all just about business. It's about, yourself, your well-being, your family, your quality of life, are all things you're probably thinking about right now. And that's important. But starting a business does require optimism and drive. And if you don't have the sort of emotional and mental bandwidth, and even like the time and money to make it happen, it's going to be very hard. But I do believe that all of you have that inside of you. You can pull it together and figure out what is something that you're passionate about, and harness that and feel like you're making progress towards something that you are building yourself, rather than feeling that you're just being affected by things that are external to you and you have little control over you. This is a chance to choose a path for yourself when you start your own business. And so keep hold of that passion and optimism as you think about what you want to do next.
Yeah, I've found starting a business personally to be the biggest source of development of anything I've done in my life so far. I haven't had kids, maybe that could be another way, but in terms of moving from like things happening to me to recognizing agency, it's not something I knew that I was going to find when I was starting a business, but I have. So pressure is a privilege is a Billie Jean King quote, famous tennis player and advocate for equal pay. And this is a mindset that I found extremely helpful, especially in those 2 years of Fyood where I had no idea what I was doing. And, sometimes something would work, but it wouldn't work the next time. And there were a lot of moments of frustration, and even with Rising, where I feel like I do know what I'm doing as much as I can. There's times where we're making decisions with 10% of the information that we want to have. Maybe that's relatable even outside of business right now. But the concept of if we're able to reframe it as like, I get to do things that matter, pressure being a privilege, being about a mindset where we have the agency, it's not happening to us, we're not victims, we have the creativity and the option to move forward. is something that has been a practice for me over the past 4 years, but definitely doubt that I would have made it to a successful point in running a business without having that shift for me personally. So we have a couple to-dos for each section, takeaways to start implementing the ideas from mindset, money, and market into moving towards starting a business.
Yeah, so the first one is balancing grief and self-care with drive and passion. I know when I think back to that summer of 2001, first of all, I took 6 weeks at least to make the decision that I was really jumping in. I sort of toyed it around in my head a bit and was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I'm scared to do that, etc. And so I took time to, focus on myself. So that might mean you are, make sure you're like taking care of yourself by doing that emotionally and taking care of yourself physically with exercise and good eating, but like get your unemployment, etc. And go ahead and do those things to take care of yourself. And on the days that you start to feel that spark percolating up inside of you, that's when you should take the time and be like, okay, I'm going to work on this for a few hours. And then another day you're not feeling it, that's okay. Come back to self-care and just continue. So you're building up that path forward, but do it when you're feeling that drive and passion. Secondly, I have this quote on my wall, which is, when you want to quit, remember why you started. There are going to be tough times with starting a business. I don't want to make it sound like, everything related to the COVID epidemic is gloom and doom and everything with a business is going to be easy. It's not. There's going to be certainly challenges there. But again, if you have something in your mind that's reminding yourself, I don't want to be back in that situation where I'm at the mercy of somebody else. I am ready to spend my time on this passion, or I'm really able to have fun and help people by doing this. If you have that clear in your head, then you'll be like, when you have those hard times, you'll be ready to go forward.
And then with the hard times, I think there are multiple ways to approach them. I think you could find success, at least temporarily, as a business owner in like fighting harder and pushing harder against it. But for me, what I found to be by far and away the most sustainable way to weather challenges and move to the next stage is by adopting a gratitude mindset. And this isn't necessarily about like burying your head in the sand or like magicking away the problems by only looking on the bright side or something like that. What it is for me is switching from a victim to an agent in my own life. So if I can find a bright side, or if I can be more appreciative in general, then I have more creativity. I have more like options available to me. My brain is working better. And so, an option for how to make gratitude part of your life is a gratitude journal. I personally, every night before I go to bed, write down 3 things that I'm grateful for at that moment. And it definitely felt a little hokey when I began, but the trick of it is it's not about writing it down at night. It's that you're going to write something down at night. So throughout the day, you're looking for things to be grateful for. And it's just this subtle mindset shift that makes it easier. Basically, the goal isn't to not have negative feelings or like avoid stress at all costs. The goal is to not get stuck in it. And if you can reframe more quickly, then you have a lot more options available to you. So that's what gratitude and appreciating things in even very difficult challenges has given me.
Great. So next we're going to talk about money. So obviously starting a business is about finding a way to make money and like not by having a job, right? So this is where we really get into the idea of you may be an accidental entrepreneur right now. Maybe you're suddenly thinking about this is the time, and I've read all of these business books that tells me, well, I should have had 6 months of savings and I should have a business plan. and I should have done all this stuff before I make the leap. Well, that may just not be the reality right now. The planning may not be perfect, but I do encourage you to go for it. And continuing with this mindset, I want you to make decisions from a sense of opportunity and abundance and not scarcity and fear. So you need to be thinking about, I am building a business that's going to be a platform for my life, financially, hopefully for your emotional well-being as well. And there are so many ways this can grow, and this is a platform for me to have a great way of making more money and fulfilling, having the quality of life I want, and not thinking about it as like, oh, I felt pinched and I had to do this, and that I'm scared and I can only do a little bit, because this can work out for you. And I want you to keep thinking about the opportunity and abundance as you make your plans for your business model.
So this has been something that's been front and center for me, learning how to have an abundant mindset with money. I grew up thinking that it was bad to make money or be rich, or I don't know where I got that message, but obviously it's not a very helpful one for starting a business. And so I feel like now I have a good enough handle on it that I can like feel when I'm switching between scarcity and fear and lack to possibility and abundance, and I've never had a good decision come from the former. But when you're in that place of like, I don't know what to do, or I don't see any other options, it can be really difficult to be like, well, now I'm going to turn on my abundance mindset, you know? And so something that has become helpful for me is recognizing that when I feel stuck, it's usually because I feel like there are two options. It's a binary, yes, no, black, white, and I don't like either of the options. And so the thing that has helped me, it's not even specific to money, but it's how I get into a place where I can be more productive financially, is looking at those two options and then just trying to find one more. So there's always a third option. It could be something that is super not attractive and you would never choose that. But if you can think of just one, then you can usually think of another one. So it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to think of another option that I want to do. It's how can I open up the possibilities here? What is one additional thing? Someone in a workshop I was doing a little while ago gave an example of like they had a meeting that was an important time, but it was when they picked up their kid from school, and something that and they applied to this was, well, I guess I don't have to pick up my kid from school. Like obviously you're going to, and you're going to find another option, but by thinking of time and money expansively, considering things that aren't necessarily good options, just recognizing that there are other ones leads to more creativity.
Yeah, that's great. And Maddie's going to talk more about this whole idea of like coming up with ideas and options and refining them and expanding them in next week's webinar. So we have some practical to-dos for you on this section, and I think these are really important. I want you to separate your immediate financial needs from your business model. This is, I think, a mistake, especially people make like in the service industry field. Like, for example, when I started as a graphic designer, it's pretty common to be like, well, you know, maybe typical in this field, people are charging $50 an hour, but I can't do that. I really need to make my rent right now. So I'm going to offer to do the job for $20 an hour. And you make a lot of, like, you make some decisions based on your own financial needs, rather than $20 an hour is not a sustainable business model. So do things that you need to do to meet your immediate financial needs. That means collecting unemployment. That might mean staying at a job. That might mean picking up a different job, especially one that does not tax you mentally and emotionally or physically. So when you leave it, you are ready to focus on your business model, because you want to be setting up the model. And I just sort of used an example of hourly rates, but there's so many other decisions that people make early on, because they have, they're literally right now, probably everyone starting a new business would be working from home, but that might not be what you want to do forever. So you need to be building in, overhead costs, chance for yourself to take a vacation and not billing every hour, or manually creating something if it's a product every hour. You need to be thinking about your business model, and you will be better off if the early stage you're getting your money somewhere else, but launching a business model at a higher level, more successful long term. So that's a really specific, tangible thing I would recommend that you walk away with right now. If you do feel like, I need to kind of lower my prices to get my foot in the door, I encourage you to think of alternatives rather than, again, with that example of like, hey, I'm going to just tell them I work for $20 an hour. You might say, well, I normally work for $50 an hour, but you can say I'm new at it, or you could just say, given the situations, whatever. There's some other ways. You might say, I would be willing to do this for $20 an hour if you were willing to do a video testimonial for me at the end. Or can I write a case study and really give all the details of how I helped you on this project? Or it might be like, you know what, you really need these 5 things, and the customer may be like, well, I can only afford 3. And you might tell them, I'm going to do all 5 for you. Again, in that exchange of like, they're going to have experienced the whole thing, and they would be willing to give you validation on a data point. There's a lot of things that can be a win-win for you and your customer, without just feeling like, hey, they are going with you because you have lower prices. So start to think about what your business model is as a separate entity from what your financial needs are. That's the most important thing. Did you have anything to add there, Maddie?
No, you covered it. I think it's just, in my experience, way more common to charge too low and underprice yourself at the beginning. It's hard to stand up for your value when you're just starting out, but it's easy to regret that later on. So
yeah, good point. Great. So now we're going to talk about thinking about the market. So up to this point, we've really been talking about you. What is your financial needs, your emotional needs right now? How do you envision your life going forward? But a successful business is not all about you. You need to sell something that other people want. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in the 3rd webinar about building a brand that the market wants. But I did want to make sure that we touch upon it here with the idea of like, everything we've been talking about so far is very internal focused, and that's not a really great way to convince somebody, hey, you should work with me because I want to make a lot of money, or I want to live a great life. That's not a good why for your buyers.
So a pretty common fallacy, especially for first-time entrepreneurs, is to put all their value into their idea and then feel like they have to protect it. They can't tell anyone what they're working on, or it might get stolen or scooped, or in some way compromised. And so the challenge for people who get stuck in that, and I certainly believed this when I was starting Fyood, luckily I got snapped out of it pretty early on. But then the challenge is that you can go a long time, a lot of investment emotionally, financially, building this thing that you think the customers in the market are going to want. And then you launch it and you've put all of this work into it and it turns out to be not quite right. and you have to either reinvent the wheel, or you never find out because you didn't have those opportunities along the way to be testing and figuring out what the market actually wants. So it's pretty common for entrepreneurs to get attached to their solution and their idea and be like, this is what's going to solve the problem that I'm seeing here. And often they have the spark right, and we do have something of value to offer, and we see the problem and see how we could start fixing it. But what people are willing to pay for, or in terms of like telling them what it is, in terms of pricing, in terms of structure and model, and all those sort of more technical business type of things, they're often slightly different from what you would think it is first starting out. So the goal here is not to build an entire business in secret and then find out what does and doesn't work if people want to buy it. The goal is to be building and testing as you go. And we'll talk about that a little more, the iteration process. But it can be tempting to say, here's what I'm building, go build it and then launch. And market wise, you want to be in touch with what people are actually looking to buy along the way.
So we have a few pretty specific and tactical to-dos for you to consider. You, as Maddie was saying, you don't want to just hole up and be so secretive about your idea that you're not clear whether people would actually pay for something like this. So you may want to survey people, and there's a couple ways of doing it, some being better than others. You know, you could just informally post something on your Facebook page. Hey, what do you think of this idea? The problem with that is that if these are your friends, they may be like overly optimistic, like, oh my gosh, that sounds like a great idea. Sometimes a better way might be like, what would you pay for this? Or how often would you buy this? Or something like that, where people start to really give you some ideas of more clearly about the value of it. You could also reach out to people who are less known to you. Like if you're in a Facebook group, there's a lot of Facebook groups for business owners where people wouldn't know you, or on LinkedIn, same thing. So you're getting a little bit less of the just like the yes people responding to you. The second idea is to network and interview. So in-person networking right now is certainly not possible, hardly, but you can start by emailing people you know who might be potential buyers, or the demographic of people who would be using your product or service, and scheduling a more in-depth type of interview. Hey, can I talk to you for 15 minutes and ask you about this, what I'm thinking about, or how you would what you would buy or do in these situations. This is sometimes called like customer discovery. And with every interview you do, try to get a recommendation of another person. And the more those people are, then again, not your immediate friends and family, it becomes a little more objective as you go along. And I would also challenge you to find at least 5 competitors and figure out how you are different, better, unique, etc. This is always it's so overlooked by so many entrepreneurs. Like, you're going to start a coffee shop. Well, there's a lot of coffee shops. So is your coffee different? Is it the location? Is it the atmosphere? Is it drive-through versus in person, of course, things like that today. But really think about who is a competitor. And if you have a very novel idea, you may be thinking, well, there is nothing like it on the market. Well, what would somebody do instead? Would they just stay home and not buy anything? Or maybe there's something like, well, they're not going to buy my product because they don't know about it, but they're doing it this way now. So I challenge you to find at least 5 competitors and talk about and get clear in your mind how you are different or better than those people. And then Maddie's going to pick up where she was talking before about testing as you go.
Yeah, so there's only so much you can do before you have actual customers, in terms of getting data that you can rely on. So surveying people and networking and getting input and talking about your idea, super valuable. But if you can, especially if you can do it without what we were talking about in money of undervaluing yourself, then the feedback from actual customers and people who have, especially if they've paid for your service, but even if they were a demo user, they are going to have feedback you can count on more than someone who maybe would never end up buying in the first place, despite how interested they are in your idea or things like that. Sometimes those people don't turn into customers, and if you don't know why, it's hard to build the right thing. So if you can turn some people into early customers, be totally upfront about, like, I'm starting out, or this, we're doing a test run, this is a beta, whatever the language is that makes sense for what you are offering. Just getting some people to become paid customers adds value to the feedback that they're able to give you.
Great. So that is, the overview of what we wanted you to walk away with today, starting with that emotional piece of really thinking about this as your complete life story. Are you ready to start a business? Then looking at the money, what do you need financially to get this, to sustain yourself in the immediate term, but build a business model that's going to work for you long term. And then looking at the market and like what is of interest to the market that still works for yourself. As a reminder, next week, Maddie's going to lead a presentation specifically about, what's your big idea? How can you find a great idea, know if it's a good idea, maybe refine it, explore, pivot, all that. So that will be next week, same time. You guys are already registered. And then 2 weeks from now, it'll be building a brand that the market wants. So really exploring this idea of like, how can you build something, both what the actual product or service is, how it's delivered, how you develop that brand that's going to attract buyers. That'll be our third webinar. So we do have plenty of time for questions. You can see there's a question box on the control panel of the GoToWebinar, and you can just go ahead and type it in. I'm going to be like looking at them, and Stephanie may be helping with that as well. So, okay, so we have a great first question here, which is, what is one thing you would have done differently when you started your businesses? So first of all, I guess Maddie and I both have multiple businesses, so it might be different for each of us. So Maddie, I'll start and then I'll turn it over to you. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Okay, so what would I have done differently? I do feel like I definitely made some of these mistakes that we're talking about, especially with Visible Logic. I don't want to make it sound like I just like, oh yeah, I did this all. Like, I feel like the pricing, for example, was something that I didn't get right at the beginning. I thought, well, I'm just working from home and I don't have a lot of overhead, and I can just like not charge that much money. There's not a lot of people who are hiring, all these sorts of things. And it took me a while to get beyond that. And that just is like attracting the wrong type of customer. And I do regret how long it took me to get to that point.
Yeah, I've also struggled with pricing adequately. And I think you touched on something important that we didn't explicitly say, is that different customers come at different price points. And if you charge at a low price and then raise your price because you find out it's not sustainable or something like that, you might have to start all over basically in marketing to a new group, which I have found with Fyood. But I think one of the biggest aha moments I had that I wish I'd had earlier was valuing the time it took to do like management and administrative tasks. I think I was over a year and a half into Fyood when I decided to finally draw up an org chart and be like, all right, who's doing what and who do I need to bring in to help us grow to the next stage? And I realized I had everything on there, like operations for the events and sales and marketing and PR and all of these different like doing things. But then I was expecting myself to just be doing all of the planning and like strategy and communicating with the people doing the parts, like on top of that invisibly. And I hadn't given myself credit yet for all the time and energy that that took. So definitely building in like the big picture thinking, time and energy. I got a lot better at my business when I realized I should be counting that.
That's such a good detail, Maddie, because that's so true. And I think that's one of the reasons so many people underprice, right? Because if you're thinking, well, I'm a plumber, I'm a photographer, or I'm a web designer, whatever your thing is, you're like, I'm going to do that. That's the work I get paid for. But realistically, when you run a business, that might be half your time. Like you probably have at least, you know, another whole equal amount of that time, and that's the thing that usually you get billed for, you know, is billable hours or something that people buy. But all of that other stuff probably takes at least as long. And that's why you end up with, you're like, oh, that's why people are charging so much to run a business. It's not sustainable if you don't do that.
Or why I'm working 16 hours a day, because I'm doing my 8 hours of work and then all the stuff that I'm not counting or charging for.
Exactly. Definitely. Okay, we have another question here. Are there practices you do to build your drive and optimism? I love that question. So, because I think a lot of people, when you start thinking about a business, you know, you can get really hung up on like profitability and I don't know, these really financial hard-edged pieces of running a business. And I think one of the points that Maddie and I, for like running this webinar, is to recognize that emotional side. And I would also say that my arc of success for Visible Logic is very connected to my arc of having practices like Maddie said about gratitude. I have a pretty regular meditation practice. For more recently, I've really solidified that. But like affirmations for me are really, really important. So I would recommend that you spend some time studying how to do some sort of daily affirmation practice. I have a set of things I say every day, and I really believe that affects your view of the world and the view of the events of every day when you have put those rose-colored glasses on at the beginning of the day with those affirmations. So affirmations for me are really important. Maddie, do you want to talk about any other practices?
Yeah, something that's still a work in progress for me is taking time off, and like letting that be okay, because as our own bosses, there's no one who's ever like, okay, you're done. Like, you know, you've finished all the tasks kind of thing, and you never will be done. I have, you know, more to do than I could possibly do. And so there has to be some kind of like okayness with not being done and stopping anyway, which is something that's taken me a while to learn. I think I'm starting to get there. One thing that helped me with it is tracking it and then recognizing how much better I was at work and as a human the next few days after I'd taken time off. So seeing it not as like a lowering opportunity of my productivity or potential success or things like that, but actually an accelerant of it. And then just finding ways to celebrate our own success too, because like there's no one saying okay, you're done with your tasks, there's also no one saying, hey, you kicked ass on this one. And so finding ways to acknowledge the things that are going well and happening in a positive manner without just moving on to the next thing to be done. These are both things that I'm still learning, but I find a lot of value in them when I do them well.
Yeah, that's great. And someone had a follow-up questions, what are some of the things that I say every day? So I say specific things like I have some business goals and I say them like in the present tense, like I am doing this, and I like, you need to like put yourself in that frame of mind that this is happening right now. Like I don't want to share all of them, but like another example is like I'll say every day, I speak with kindness to my children. Like that was one. And I should also mention with my affirmations, I change them like as things evolve. Sometimes something has run its course and it's become part of my being. I can stop saying it. Or like with this COVID situation, I was being stressed out and maybe not speaking as kindly to my children as I should have. So I actually said it every day. I say that I take care of myself physically by exercising and eating well. And that's something you start to identify with. I am somebody who exercises and I'm somebody who eats healthy by saying it specifically every day. So those are some real specifics.
They're so good. I don't use affirmations every day right now, but when I was working on finding out what an abundance mindset is and how to think positively and expansively about money, that was one of the things that was a very helpful tool.
Cool. So someone has a question about what are specifics in this post-COVID world that we might want to be thinking about with starting a business. So that's a great question. We didn't really, hit that one right on the nail. So as somebody involved with branding and marketing, I do think your online presence is absolutely critical, right? I think there was a time when you could kind of start a business and, maybe if it's a professional services business, you could rely on in-person networking. If it was a product, maybe you're going to just rely on, like maybe people get started like at the farmers markets and fairs and those kind of things. And those opportunities are not there right now. So you do need to think about how is your product or service delivered in this time, and definitely your online presence. Like you've got to get a website up and running immediately. It can't be something like I'm going to do that later, because however you end up finding your clients, whether it's directly online via say social media or digital marketing, or even if it is a networking thing, people are going to be like, go to your website, right? That's going to be the next thing that people look for in this day and age more than any other time. Maddie, are there other ideas you have there?
Yeah, I think probably folks on the call may have realized this, but there are some businesses that are better now. And like this has massively expanded their opportunities and even parts of the market. In this time that is detrimental for so many, there are opportunities and growth areas like there would be in any change. So looking for those opportunities, I mean, obviously, like we're getting many things delivered now, and we've moved much of our connection and engagement to digital with Fyood. So that's been in-person cooking competitions, and now we're doing, we're testing, we're doing this entire creation process on a pivot towards delivery mystery baskets where you can play at home, or are we creating virtual competitions? So like that specific pivot, it remains to be seen if that's something that has more value than what we were initially doing, or if it's just different. But I think starting from a question of like, where's the opportunity right now, rather than like, how can I work with these negatives, is just a frame that may be helpful in refining whatever idea is coming to mind.
Yeah, good. Okay, we've got one more question. How did you know your tipping point? You know, when did you decide to make the big leap? Um, so I'll answer first, which is I didn't, I'm like you may be in this situation right now. I was the accidental entrepreneur. I didn't have a tipping point. I just lost my job. So I'm probably not the right person to answer. So maybe Maddie has a better answer.
Might be relevant right now.
Yeah.
Um, for Fyood, I actually, so Fyood was my second business idea. And I never launched the first one because I got stuck in a lot of these things about like, don't tell anyone your idea, like hold it close, build it, and then launch. And I got so excited about Fyood along the way that decided to move that direction instead. But part of it was just feeling really stuck for a very long time. So then when I was able to find energy and creativity and apply this process that we're going to talk about next week, the like life that it brought back to me and the expanded potential and opportunity to like take agency for myself. It wasn't necessarily a moment, but it was like, how could I honestly, one other thing that was helpful is there was someone else at the job that I was stuck at who was like 12 years older than me or so. And she never meant to end up there. And she was miserable. And she, went through a divorce and felt like she didn't have options to do anything else at that point, and she got stuck. And I felt stuck at the time, and I got scared that I would stay stuck. So not a moment, but like moving from stuckness to energy and ability and agency was something that once I got like the glimpse that it might be there, I couldn't risk letting it go.
Yeah, that's so great. It's so true because I think that some people today who are in a job that, they may be feeling very thankful. I didn't lose my job with this. I still have income, but that doesn't mean that this still can be the kick in the pants you need to do it. And trust me, you can do it no matter what the situation. So, um, let's see, we actually have, okay, so we have time for one more question, and it's here again. So what platform is best, Wix, WordPress, or is there another one that you would recommend to build your website?
Emily question for sure.
So okay, so so those of you who know me better or worse than others, we build WordPress websites at Visible Logic. I think WordPress is a great solution if you can hire a firm to do it for you. I do think like Wix or Squarespace are a lot more friendlier for the person who's like trying to build it themselves. I do feel strongly that you need a website. Like, do not put all of your apples into like Facebook or Instagram. Those are important because they have traffic that can expand your reach, whereas you can put up a website and it's just like crickets, nobody's coming to it. But I would hesitate to build something where everything is through this platform that you really don't control and own. So I think you should choose the platform that you can afford right now and that you can manage, meaning like some people go on and they get WordPress and that's fine, or you're going to go on and try a template at Squarespace and be like completely frustrated or whatever. Choose there's not really one that's better or worse in that sense. It's the one that you can actually get what you want at the price you can afford right now. As a professional web designer, there's some benefit to me when I work with a client who's actually already built their website once in one of those platforms, because you've gone through and understood more about like, this is how a website is built. This is like some of the technical challenges. This is how you start realizing like, aside from the platform, what really matters is your message and your visual identity and how you are attracting your client. And that doesn't matter what platform you're on. You can do that really well or really poorly. So I think that's the nugget I should end on. Great. So we are going to wrap it up. Just as a reminder, again, you're already pre-registered for the next 2 weeks. Next week, Maddie's going to walk us through how to find your big idea. And then 2 weeks from today, it's going to be building a brand that the market wants. You will get a recording of this, and if you cannot make the next 2, you'll get those recordings regardless of whether you're there live. Please go ahead and share these. People can still join in. It's not too late for people to join us on this 3-part journey. So thank you so much for joining me and Maddie, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, everyone.